It was late afternoon and I was cleaning. It was late afternoon and I was cleaning my bedroom when I heard the door creak behind me. I turned around and there was Alden standing in the doorway, staring at the thing in my hands. My heart stopped. How could I explain this? The object was far from innocent, a large, brightly colored toy one that no polite conversation could sidestep. I had pulled it out of the drawer to dust the back of the cabinet. Not thinking much of it, I had locked the door. Or so I thought. Alden was my 23-year-old old stepson. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. He worked at a local brewery and usually stayed out late with friends after his shifts, but there he was, tall and lean, his dark hair falling into his amused blue eyes. "What's that?" he asked. His voice caught somewhere between curious and teasing. My face went red hot. I dropped the item like it had burned me and grabbed the first thing I could find, a throw pillow from the bed, to cover it. "It's none of your business," I stammered, feeling my throat. Tien, but his expression didn't change, if anything. He leaned against the doorframe, his curiosity growing. "You know, you don't have to act so embarrassed," he said with a small smirk. "It's not like I haven't seen something like that before." I wanted to crawl into a hole. The audacity of this kid. Well, man, really to stand there so casually, completely unfazed while my world spun out of control. I forced a laugh, desperate to diffuse the attention. "Alden, seriously, Ligo, mind your own business. You shouldn't even be in here." But he didn't move for a moment. There was silence between us, heavy and almost unbearable. He wasn't looking at the pillow in my hands anymore. He was looking at me. His gaze was different, not the usual laid-back or playful glances I was used to. This one lingered too long, too intently. It was as if he'd peeled back a layer of the person he thought I was, and found someone else entirely. I felt something strange, a flicker of warmth deep in my chest, followed by a sharp pang of guilt. This was wrong, whatever. It was absolutely wrong. I was his stepmother, for God's sake. I was married to his father. I shook my head and broke the silence. "Please, Alden, just go." He finally shrugged, lifting his hands in mock surrender. All right," he said, his tone light again. But before he left, he gave me one last look, a look that set my already unsettled thoughts into overdrive. As the door closed behind him, I sat down on the edge of the bed, the pillow still clutched against my chest. My heart was racing. I couldn't even bring myself to put the item back into the drawer. It felt like something invisible had shifted in the air between us, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I knew I'd never see Alden the same way again for the rest of the evening. I couldn't shake the moment from my mind. I tried. I cooked dinner, folded laundry, and even sat next to Victor on the couch while he flipped through old westerns on the TV. But Alden's face, that amused smirk, and the unsettling glint in his eyes haunted me. Victor barely noticed my distraction. That was nothing new. He'd been wrapped up in his hobbies, gardening, woodworking, crossword puzzles for years now, ever since his retirement. I didn't resent him for it. That would have been too easy. But sometimes I felt like more of a living caretaker than a wife. At one point I glanced down the hall and caught Alden's shadow as he moved around in his room. I could hear the faint hum of music coming through his door, a low bass line that didn't match the quiet stillness of the rest of the house. My heart jumped for no reason I could justify, and I turned my attention back to my husband. Victor was snoring softly, his chin tilted down toward his chest. He'd fallen asleep in his recliner again. The TV still droning on. I thought about waking him, but what would be the point? Instead, I stood and wandered into the kitchen, grateful for a moment of solitude. But I wasn't alone for long. Alden walked in his bare feet, quiet against the hardwood floor. He wore a faded t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair tousled like he'd just run his hands through it. "Hey," he said casually, opening the fridge and grabbing a bottle of water. "You're up late." "I could say the same about you," I replied, keeping my tone light. He smiled, leaning against the counter, just unwinding. "You know, it's not easy being under this roof sometimes." The comment made me pause. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, but there was a hint of something serious in his expression. It's nothing, just living here again. I guess I feel like I don't fit anymore. I softened at that. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of maternal concern. It's just temporary, Alden. You'll figure things out. You're smart and capable. You land on your feet. Thanks, Melina. He said, his voice quieter now. I appreciate that. For a moment we stood in silence. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, the space between us shrinking, even though neither of us moved. His eyes lingered on mine, and I felt that same flicker of warmth in my chest again. I cleared my throat and busied myself wiping the counter, desperate to break whatever spell was threatening to take hold. But Alden wasn't finished about earlier. He started, his tone turning playful again. You don't have to be embarrassed, you know. I mean, we're all human, right? My hand froze mid-wipe, and I turned to him, trying to keep my composure. Alden, let's not talk about that. All right, it was an accident, and it's not worth bringing up again. Okay, he said, raising his hands in surrender, but there was a teasing edge in his smile that made my stomach flip. He walked past me, then close enough that I caught a faint whiff of his cologne. I didn't turn around, but I could feel his presence behind me for a moment before he finally left the kitchen that night. As I lay in bed next to Victor, my mind raced. What was happening to me, to us, to this house? I'd always been able to maintain clear boundaries, lines that weren't meant to be crossed, but Alden had a way of being crossed. But Alden had a way of bending those lines even when he wasn't trying to. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure I wanted him to stop the next morning. I tried to act normal. I prepared breakfast like I always did, eggs, toast, and coffee for Victor, a smoothie for myself. Alden was the last to come into the kitchen, as usual, his hair still damp from a shower. He greeted Victor with a casual morning, and me with a warm smile that made my pulse quicken. The three of us sat at the table, the clinking of silverware and occasional snippets of conversation filling the air. But underneath it all, I could feel the tension every time. Alden's hand brushed mine as we passed the salt or refilled coffee. It felt deliberate. I caught him watching me more than once, his gaze steady and unreadable. Victor, of course, noticed none of this. After breakfast, Alden offered to help me clean up. Normally he would have disappeared into his room or out with friends, so his offer caught me off guard. You don't have to, I said, stacking plates in the sink. I want to. He replied, already grabbing a dish rag. We worked in silence for a while, but the air between us felt charged at one point. I reached for a glass at the same time he did, and our hands collided. Neither of us pulled away immediately. You're different, he said quietly, his voice just above a whisper. What do you mean? I asked, my throat suddenly dry. He hesitated, his eyes searching mine. I don't know. You don't act like other women your age. I laughed nervously, stepping back to create some distance. Well, that's FL Shing, it's not just that, he continued. The silence between us heavy and charged. Then, without thinking, I turned and walked back to my room, closing the door behind me. But even as I lay back down, I knew this wasn't over. Whatever this was, this impossible, dangerous thing between us, it wasn't going away, and I wasn't sure I wanted it to. The next time it happened, there wasn't a storm to blame, nor a flickering light to hide behind. This time it was deliberate. It started in the laundry room of all places. I was pulling warm towels from the dryer, the mundane rhythm of folding them offering some kind of escape. The house was quiet. Victor had gone to a friend's house to watch a game, and I thought I had the place placed to myself. Then I heard the soft creak of the floorboards behind me. You're always working, Alden said, his voice light, but laced with something I couldn't quite place. I didn't turn around. Someone has to, I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. He chuckled softly. Fair enough. But don't you ever get tired of it? Tired of what? Taking care of everything, taking care of everyone? When's the last time someone took care of you? His words cut through me like a knife. I turned then, clutching a folded towel against my chest like a shield. Alden, I don't think this is a conversation we should be having. Why not? He asked, leaning casually against the door frame. He looked so at ease, so unbothered, but his eyes told a different story. They were sharp, searching, and impossibly focused on me because I said, my voice faltering, "It's not appropriate." Appropriate, he repeated, as though testing the word. That's not the same as on, though, is it? I wanted to argue, to shut him down before he could say anything else that would make this worse, but before I could, he stepped closer, closing the distance between us. "You don't have to pretend with me, Melina," he said softly. "I see you. I see the way you carry this house, the way you keep everything together while everyone else just takes. Don't you think you deserve something for yourself? My throat something for yourself?" My throat tightened and I shook my head, stepping back until I felt the edge of the counter against my hips. "Alden, whatever this is, it has to stop." He reached out, then his hand brushing against mine. It was such a small, simple gesture, but it felt like the ground beneath me was shifting. "Tell me you don't feel it too." He said, his voice barely more than a whisper. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. I couldn't tell him that I couldn't lie to him or to myself. And then, just like that night in the living room, he kissed me, but this time I didn't stop him. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments and whispered secrets. We were careful, or at least we thought we were. Alden was good at finding excuses to linger in the same room as me, offering to help with dinner, fixing a broken cabinet door, even volunteering to run errands with me. At first it was thrilling, the rush of something forbidden, but the reality of our situation weighed heavily on me. I knew it couldn't last. I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. One afternoon, as I was putting away groceries, Alden came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. I stiffened, glancing toward the doorway to make sure no one was there. "Alden," I hissed, trying to pull away. "Victor could walk in any minute. HEK at the hardware store." Alden said, his voice calm. "Relax," but I couldn't relax. Not anymore. The paranoia was starting to eat away at me every time Victor looked at me. I wondered if he knew every time Bethany, our nosy neighbor, waved at me from across the street. I felt like she could see right through me. "We need to talk," I said, turning to face Alden about what he asked, his expression unreadable about this about us. His jaw tightened, and for the first time I saw a flicker of anger in his eyes. "What about us?" Of anger in his eyes. "What about us?" he asked. "This has to stop," I said, forcing the words out. "It's too risky. It's not fair to Victor." "Fair to Victor," he repeated, his voice rising. "What about fair to you? Do you even hear yourself? You're so busy worrying about him that you don't even think about what you want. What I want doesn't matter." I snapped, "That's exploitive." Alden shot back, "You deserve to be happy, Melina. You deserve to be with someone who actually sees you." The words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but couldn't. Deep down, I knew he was right. The breaking point came a few weeks later. Victor had invited Bethany and her husband over for dinner, and I was doing my best to play the role of the perfect hostess, but Bethany's sharp eyes seemed to be on me all night, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something after dinner. As I was cleaning up in the kitchen, Bethany cornered me. "You've been awfully distracted lately," she said, her tone casual but her eyes probing. "Just busy," I replied, forcing a smile. "You know how it is." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Does Victor know?" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "No, I manage." She shrugged, her expression unreadable. "Whatever's going on with you and Alden," I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice shaking. Bethany smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just be careful." Melina, secret have a way of coming out that night. As I lay in bed, I couldn't stop replaying Bethany's words in my mind. I felt trapped, caught between two worlds that couldn't coexist the next morning. Alden found me in the garden pulling weeds with more force than necessary. "You're avoiding me," he said, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. "I'm trying to protect us," I replied, not. "I'm trying to protect us," I replied, not looking up. "Protect us from what?" he asked. Stepping closer, from this blowing up in our faces, I said, standing and wiping my hands on my jeans, "Bethany knows, Alden. She knows." He frowned, his expression darkening. "How could she know? I don't know, but she does. I said, my voice rising, and if she tells Victor, she won't, he said firmly. You don't know that, I snapped. You don't understand how dangerous this is. Alden grabbed my hand, his grip strong but not painful. What I understand is that I don't want to lose you. The raw emotion in his voice caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. You won't, I said finally, my voice barely more than a whisper, but we have to be careful for both our sakes. The days that followed were tense. Bethany didn't say anything to Victor, at least not that I knew of, but the weight of her suspicion hung over me like a cloud. Alden tried to reassure me, but even he seemed more on edge than usual. Then, one evening, Victor came home earlier than expected. I was in the laundry room with Alden, the two of us standing closer than we should have been. When we heard the front door open, we sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Victor called my name, his voice carrying through the house in here. I replied, my voice steady, despite the panic rising in my chest. Victor appeared in the doorway, his eyes sweeping over the room for a moment. I thought he was going to say something, but then he just nodded. Dinner ready? I said quickly. Almost, I replied. He left without another word, but the look he gave me lingered long after he was gone. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment in the laundry room, the way Victor's eyes had lingered on me just a second too long. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to end it. Whatever this was between Alden and me, it felt too big, too consuming to simply walk away from. But deep down, I knew the storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. It started over. It was just beginning. It started with Victor coming home unexpectedly early. But this time, it wasn't just the timing that caught me off guard. His face was tight, his expression unreadable as he stepped into the house and set his briefcase down with a deliberate thud. Alden Victor called his voice sharp enough to make my stomach drop. Alden appeared moments later, his casual demeanor contrasting Victor's obvious tension. Yet Alden asked, his voice as calm as ever. I need to talk to you, Victor said, his tone holding an edge. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as the space between the three of us seemed to close in. Sure, Alden said, though his gaze flickered toward me. I stayed frozen in place, unable to look away. Victor didn't say anything else. He turned and walked. Say anything else. He turned and walked down the hallway. Alden following him with that same unnerving calm. The silence that followed seemed endless. I waited for what felt like hours before Victor came back into the kitchen. He didn't speak immediately, but his eyes were intense, focused on something or someone in a way I'd never seen before. The tension was suffocating. Finally he spoke, you and Alden. He said, his voice low tight with something I couldn't place. I know.